Hey everybody, Giselle Grenier here from ArtPlace.ca. In this book of backgrounds video, I thought I would do something different. I'm working with a smaller piece of mixed media paper, and what will be interesting is how I'm going to bind this in the actual book of backgrounds when the actual art is finished. Now, this piece of paper that I got is from the same line, the mixed media paper, and this one is bent. I dropped the pad and the paper was bent, so I'm thinking, I'm not going to throw this out. I'm going to use it. So I'm using the DecoArt Media Gesso, and I'm applying a good layer on this. And nice and thick. It'll take a while to dry. What I want to make sure though, and I'm going to do this on wax paper, is I want to make sure that one side, and I'm going to end up doing both sides, has a good amount of gesso on here, because when you're binding, and I know in advance when I'm going to be binding this, I need this part to be strong. If when you're binding all your backgrounds and art into a book format, you can also use, let's say, duct tape. You don't have to paint it. I'm going to be painting it because that's going to be actually part of the artwork. So I'm not going to bore you with the painting of the gesso, painting of the piece with the gesso, because I am going to paint both sides. The colors for this, I'm going to be taking a hint from the last video I did, which had an epic fail on it with Dioxazine Purple. The color just really didn't do it for me, and I know what I was going for. So in this video, I'm going to be not so much stenciling with the gesso, because that I already know, that experiment already went in place. I want to get that same effect of the rough, dry brush, grungy look, and then the stenciling going to be on top. I'm going to use the stenciling on top in the actual creation of the art piece, but I'm going to change up the colors. So the colors I'm going to use: ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, raw umber, and titanium white. And I'm using ultramarine blue and burnt sienna because I want to show you how you can get something similar to raw umber or burnt umber in case you don't have those colors handy. I may pull out some more colors, I'm not quite sure. So once I have that, once that's dry, I'll turn it around and I'll paint the other side, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do with this piece. So this is relatively dry. On the back side it's still a little bit tacky, but I don't know if you can see. There we go. When we do some dry brushing later on, that's going to make for a really nice technique. That'll be done in another video. But the other thing I was thinking is you can also fold this in, create a mini spread, which actually looks pretty interesting. So I'm going to work on this side, and for the paints, so I'm going to put out the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna next to each other, equal amounts. Oh, chaos is awake. And some raw umber and titanium white. Make sure you don't use the translucent white. It needs to be titanium white. And in saying that, you really can use anything you want. And I'm not sure if I'm going to need the matte medium at this point. No. I wanted to extend the drying time a little bit. No, I'm not going to need it yet. I mean, need it at all. So I want to put a wash on everything here. And I have a whack load of brushes here that are drying. Get those over here. I lied. Yes, I do need matte medium. Not a lot. And I'm going to mix this. I need to get a base on there. So a little bit of white. I'm going to bring a little bit of raw umber. So I'm looking for something like that. I'll grab my color book, and it's so on white paper it looks like that, but it's going to dry darker than that though. little bit more. Remember, add dark to white. Don't add white to dark, because if you add too much, if you have too much dark, you'll end up having to add more and more and more white. So it's easier to start with the white and then pull in the dark. I'm going to add a little bit of matte medium. That'll extend the drying time, because it's getting kind of hot outside. And I'm going to take a big number 1 wash brush. I'm just going to dampen it in water, blot it out, and I'm just going to put a coating. Again, me being cheap with paint, I don't want to thin this paint down. I want to use it pretty dry. I've got the window open. Hear the birds chirping. I love hearing the birds chirping. Pull in a bit more white, a little bit more matte medium, a speck of the burnt umber, and just keep going. And I don't want to have a opaque finish to it, but I do want to get a background started in there. And this needs to dry, but it's not going to take long. If you have a heat gun, you can heat gun this part. Because it's so hot, I don't want to use the heat gun. And right now, I'm very impatient with drying time, so that's okay. A bit more matte medium, and I need more white. More white. Bring in more burnt umber. And I'm going to repeat the same thing now, just around the edges, and I'm going to make this very irregular. This is probably the one time where if you get hard edges of a brush line, it's fine. And I'm working towards the center. Again, you don't want a complete opaque finish. You can see how it's starting to build up. We're going to be doing, and I was going to do it in this one, the stenciling on top of this with the similar technique, but I'm going to leave the stenciling till the art part of the phase 2 of the series. Because once you do the stenciling, thick stenciling, there's really nothing else you can do with the page. And I'm going to rinse my brush. And I'm just going to pick up the excess. This also adds some additional texture. And now I'm going to, while that's drying, I want to show you, make sure you get all the white out of the brush. I'm actually just going to sit that there. And I'm going to get a round brush, and let's take, it's going to do a quick lesson while this dries. So if we take roughly equal parts of burnt umber and burnt sienna, you're going to get yourself what I call chromatic black, which is black without color. I pull a little bit of white, you can see the underlying color. So this black leans more towards the blue. Okay, if you were to take the same mixture again, mix that up, and I went a little bit more on with a bit more burnt sienna. Pick up a bit of white. You can see the true underlying color. Now we're getting something to more of a warmish black. This is closer to a Mars black. I had to pause there for a second. Some guy on a motorcycle decided he wanted to rev. Okay, now if you want something like Payne's Gray, take more ultramarine blue, add in just about half the part. So it's like 2 parts ultramarine blue to 1 part burnt sienna. Add a bit of white, see the true underlying color. And that's close to a Payne's Gray. If you want something closer to burnt umber, you can do it like this, but you can even make it even warmer. So 2 parts burnt sienna to about 1 part ultramarine blue. This is closer to raw umber. Mind you, raw umber has a little bit of green in it. Let me add a bit more blue to that. That's too browny. There we go. Okay, so you can get a variation of darks just by using blue, and a brown. So you can do the combination ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, raw umber. Then you can go the other way. You can use ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, Prussian blue, phthalo blue, cerulean blue with a brown. And if you don't have a brown, which you should, if you don't have a brown, just take red, blue, and yellow, mix them together to get a brown, and then you add more of the blue to get your chromatic blacks, your variations. Okay, I'm liking this one here. Now, just to show you, raw umber with a bit of white. That's raw umber with a bit of white. Which has a little bit of a green cast to it. And this is the color that I use when working on formal people portraits. Okay, so there you go. So I'm going to bring this over now. Look at this. Isn't that beautiful? Okay, we're going to stay in this close up here. And I don't think I'm going to need the stencil brush, because I decided I'm not going to do stenciling, but I still need to build up. Yes, I am. I lied. So I'm going to take that mixture, which is a 2 parts burnt sienna. No, that's a 2 parts. That's a 2 parts ultramarine blue. And I'm going to randomly go in some spots. And I'm going to lightly brush over the areas, especially that has a lot of texture. And what's happening, because this brush is domed, the tippy part of it, well, that's really rough. The tippy part of it is what's actually rubbing against the surface. So if you think of, if this is the paper, and then this is the mountain with the gesso, and the brush is only going to be rubbing these tippy parts and not inside. Tippy parts, that's just a funny word. Okay, it's going to make more. That's going to be too blue. If you don't want a color mix, just use a burnt umber. You can do this entire project just with burnt umber, raw umber, and white. But very, very little paint. You can also just wipe out the excess here. And you want it random. And this technique is hard on your brushes, so make sure that you don't use good brushes. See, this one here is really cool because it's picking up the brushing. Look at that, the brush stroke direction. I could have put more gesso on this to get rid of that crease, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to use that to my advantage. And I think I'm going to make this actually into a folio, which is a folded page for book purposes, and make an insert. So out of this, folding it, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 additional pieces, additional surfaces for art. I'm going to take some raw umber. Okay, see what's happening now? Now I've got too much paint. I didn't pounce enough. I've got a pattern going on here. So let's see how we can fix this. Water and paper towel. Voila! So let's try that again. I'm going to go back to the, see, cheapy on paint. I've run out already. That has to be dry, so I'm going to work someplace else. And these brushes, although the number 8 Bristle Bright is my ultimate favorite, I use that brush almost in everything. For little pieces like this, sometimes it's nicer using a smaller brush. So I'm going to show you how to use this brush to create a vintage edge. But the vintage edge I want it to be more on the red side. So I think we're almost all done. I'm getting something really rough looking. So I'm going to take burnt sienna. Ooh, hit that with a bit of blue. Nope, gonna need a little bit more blue. I would like to immediately go to transparent red iron oxide. That's my go-to color when I want to do anything vintage. So I see what's happening with the brush. It's getting, let me just reach over. I'm sorry. Oh, that's because of all the rough work that I'm doing. You know what? And it happens. These are just inexpensive craft brushes. They're not fancy. When you're working on with this technique, you do not want to use your very, very expensive brushes. So I'm going to show you two. So if I'm thinking I'm going to actually be folding this, okay, so if I want to make this like the centerpiece, to vintage this, you can just take the brush and you can just rub it like this. There are fancy tools out there that can do this for you. It's not necessary. But if you have the tools, use them. That's fine. I just don't like, I don't jump on the bandwagon of every trendy thing. Not anymore. I stopped doing that when I ended up having to give away 3/4 of my studio to my grandkids because I didn't have any more room. Nice edge. And just by doing this, I already have an idea what I'm going to do with this page. I'm going to use my number 8 Bristle Bright on the other side. Back a few years ago, I did a series called The Dark Side of Vintage. And I didn't get to finish the series. It was basically anything vintage, but it was the darker side of it. Did some stuff with Edgar Allan Poe and some, you know, steampunk and stuff like that. And Joe got sick and I ended up kind of squashing all that stuff, and I ended up doing a lot of his work. I do work for him freelance, doing computer programming and more design consulting for websites and that. So I jumped in and then basically took over until he got himself all better. So that project kind of was kind of put on the back burner, but I'm thinking with this one here, I can see a Dark Side of Vintage piece showing up for this. Okay, so I'm going to take this poor dilapidated brush now. I'm going to put it in water. And now, and when I say my favorite number 8 Bristle Bright, okay, I have all these because I want to have one ready that's dry. Last year and prior to that, I had one brush and it was so worn out. So now if I want to basically do the same thing with this brush, which will be a little bit faster, so pick up a little bit of paint, pounce, no medium, and you're basically going to do the same thing. And I'm going on an angle, so I get to use more of the brush. And it'll take a bit to prime the brush to get the right amount, there we go, to get the right amount of paint on there. So see how fast I got that one done? And I just now came up with the idea what I'm going to do for the little cover of this. Last night, I came in the studio and I thought, well, I'm not going to create any videos. I'm going to just prep some backgrounds. Just prepping some backgrounds with gesso, I came up with so many ideas. And you know what? I ended up going to bed about midnight and then I couldn't sleep because my head was full of these ideas. Even after doing a brain dump on paper, journaling, meditating, listening to my Brain FM, sleep music, still couldn't sleep. I was just so excited about all these different things. And wouldn't you know, I woke up this morning, I can't remember one of them. There we go. Isn't that nice? So if this was going to be the outside, I could then do the same thing. I would score it and then burnish it to make it flat. Then I would just do the outside edge. There we go. And you basically would just do this as much as you could, or as much as you wanted to. I still would have liked to have done this with the transparent red iron oxide, because I love, it's one of my favorite colors. But this is looking really, really old now. See that there? It's a bit much. Push it out towards the outside. Don't rub it this way, rub it this way, so you're pushing the paint out. And then as you've gone over the edges a few times, then I can have the brush a bit flatter, which will get a bit more paint on the inside. Then as you're running out of paint, then you can bring the brush in the corners. That'll further darken it. Just be careful. Mind you, if you add too much paint, you can always just wipe it off. Spray with water. We already know how to do that. There we are. So that's an effect that I really, really like. Oh, I hear somebody outside. So I'm going to take the burnt ultramarine blue and raw umber. And there's just some spots here I really want to focus that heaviness. Thinking that I'm going to be folding this, I'm going to darken the center a bit. This is going to be the inside. Oh, there's a doggy outside that's barking and she's upset. Lady's upset. That's what happens when you have dogs off leash. Alrighty. There we are. So this is with the ultramarine blue and the burnt raw umber. If I said burnt umber before, I apologize. Oops, didn't pounce. That looks more blue, which is okay. If you want it more red, use burnt umber, because that's really red. Or just burnt sienna by itself, I'm not a fan of, but whatever color you want, do that. But no water whatsoever. It's dry brush, dry brush, dry brush. It does take a little bit of time. But the beauty about this, I've done this using the Distressings from Ranger. They're water soluble, so if you get them wet and everything comes off. This is permanent. The acrylics are permanent, and that's what I want to go for. Oh, I'm loving this. I'm coming up with some ideas. I am coming up with some ideas for this. I'm gonna have to make one of these for a cover for my planner. Alrighty, so that's it. We're finished. So this is essentially what the effect I was trying to get in the previous lesson. Assuming you're watching them in order, which you probably aren't going to be, but there's one lesson where I had done a large piece and I had stenciled with gesso a big motif, and I was doing something similar to this, but I used yellows and reds and then violets and purples, and the purple just ruined it. But in saying that, I should actually show you. Where is it? In saying that, it's drying. Let me just adjust the zoom on that. In saying that, this would make for a really cool book cover. Like if it was the full cover, that would make for a really cool cover. I'm okay with this as a cover. But as a journal page, really, I do a little bit of stuff here and here. There's really not much else I can do with this. But this is what I was going for, this type of look. So it was just the colors. The purple just ruined it. There we are. All set. So play with this and I would love to see a picture of it if you want to share it with me or post it in the private Facebook group. Play with some colors, okay? Ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Play with the colors, add a little bit of white to see the true underlying colors so you can see what's going on. You'll play with some colors, play with some brushes. You don't have to use the same brushes I am. Use whatever you have and just try different things. If you don't have gesso, use titanium white. If you have really, really cheap craft paint, you're not going to get the texture like this. What you may want to do with that is just to apply a couple of layers, a layer, let it dry, then another layer. It'll take you much longer. So you need to start with good, thick gesso to get the really, really cool techniques, or apply the craft paint all over the page. Then let's say lay down some saran wrap or some corrugated cardboard or something and just lift it off, and the paint will rise, and then you'll have some techniques. I'm going to show all that in future videos, so stay tuned and I will see you in the next video. So until then, stay inspired.